we get started, I want to remind the students enrolled in the class to please double space your essays. Thank you. Also, if you would like to share any of these lectures with friends or family, they are live streamed, as Jess mentioned, on the Syracuse University Museum of Art's YouTube channel. They're also recorded there, so you can watch them at any time. And I'll ask Jess to put that link in the chat for you here so you can easily access that. And then without any further ado, I'll hand the floor over to Castles to introduce tonight's guest. Thanks, Castles.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Jess. All right, I am so happy to introduce Karen. I had the good fortune to come to Karen Ishizuka's work in two different ways. The first was an introduction from Michelle Wu, who is one of the brilliant minds behind For Freedoms, which is an artist-led organization that models and increases civic engagement, discourse, and direct action. And when I told Michelle about this In Plain Sight project, this nationwide 80 artist strong coalition that I was co-founding with Rafa to bring visibility to the injustices of immigrant detention, Michelle was adamant that we hitch our grand vision to Karen's work. And the second way that I learned about Karen is through my good friend, Dean Hayasaka, whose late dad, Phil Hayasaka, had survived both Japanese incarceration camps and the Korean War. And Dean had spoken passionately about the curatorial and community work that Karen had done. And he had dedicated his youth to making Japanese American representation in cinema and had often documented a lot of community events that took place in Los Angeles. And he told me once of Karen bringing together Japanese big drum traditions and First Nations percussions. Dean was the cameraman who shot this performance, and he tells stories of walking through dark desert gorges in the wee hours of the morning and the thump of hides that were played by two distinct traditions but united in rhythm. This reverberation, he remembers going through his body as the canyons glowed a soft red with emanating sunrise. The intertwining of intersubjectivities and allowing for space for difference and the solidarity of this beat that beats through these different traditions is something that I know well, that Karen does well. And to be clear, this is an anecdote that I hear via way of broken telephone. So Karen, I forgive me if this is somewhat botched, but this kind of romanticized version is something that speaks true. Karen has this ability to have both grand vision and emotional intelligence, and that for sure rings true. Karen Ishizuka is a third-generation Japanese American, a judo Buddhist, mother, grandmother, wife, friend, comrade, and fellow traveler. A writer and currently the chief curator of the Japanese American National Museum. She has also made films, plays, clothes, poems, and her fair share of mistakes. Her books include Serve the People, Making Asian Americans in the 60s, Lost and Found, Reclaiming the Japanese American Incarceration, and co-editing of Mining the Home Movie, Excavations of the Histories of Memory. She's also producer and has written 27 films, including Infinite Shades of Grey, Toyo, sorry if I botched the pronunciation here, Mai Yataki, and Infinite Shades of Grey 2002, which is an official selection for the Sundance Film Festival, Looking Like the Enemy, Something Wrong Within, and Fool's Dance. She pioneered the establishment of the historical, cultural significance of home movies in the United States and served on the National Film Preservation Board. She received her master's degree in social work from the San Diego State University and a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, Los Angeles. She is currently president of the board of Okuru Mental Health, Leadership and Foundation. She is also the founder of Suru for Solidarity, which is a nonviolent direct action project with Japanese American social justice advocates, working to end detention sites and support frontline immigrant and refugee communities that are being targeted by racist, inhumane immigration policies. They say that we stand on the moral authority of Japanese Americans who suffered the atrocity and legacy of US concentration camps during World War II. And they say, quote, stop repeating history. And with that, I would gladly and happily pass it over to Karen. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Castles. Oh my gosh. Castles, since this project of In Plain Sight has become one of my best friends. We spoke a lot while we were doing this, and I just had mentioned that I hadn't seen her for a while. And I also wanted to mention, Castles, that you know, I really didn't know that you had were friends with Dean Hayasaka, and I am actually had wondered about his father a lot, and really now consider him, you know, one of the ancestors and one who has led me to where I am today. So welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. You know, as I was mentioning to Holly and Jess, that this is one of the silver linings of this double pandemic, that, well, at least the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, of because it would be very difficult for me to get from where I am in Los Angeles to Syracuse. But, you know, speaking of Los Angeles, I'd first like to acknowledge that I am beaming to you today from the traditional ancestral land of the Gabrielino people, which is now known as Culver City in Los Angeles County, California. So I just wanted to mention this because this brief act of land acknowledgement is really helpful in realizing, making me realize and remember the occupied reality of this country and the ongoing process of colonization that we continue to be a part of, and which is actually, the acknowledgement is a step in the truth and reconciliation that we should all be a part of. I am going to share my screen. Which I can't see. Can you see it?
Yes, we can see the PowerPoint screen.
Okay, so why can't I see it? When we tried it out, of course, it worked, and now. I am just seeing the thumbnails. Okay, I am going to try then to.
If you're able to navigate to play from start, it may be in like a presentation mode, because right now we see the PowerPoint screen.
Okay, maybe that's it.
Now we see the first slide.
Okay, so you see the first slide now. Okay, very good. Sorry. So, and now I don't see anybody else, including me, but I will continue. So, you know, in addition to acknowledging the land, I also wanted to pay respects to our ancestors, of which Phil Hayasaka is now one. This is my grandfather, Momota Okura, in Long Beach, California in the 1930s. So, you know, without even knowing him, from the photograph alone, you know a lot about him, that he's a proud, distinguished gentleman with his top hat, excuse me, and his medals from the Russo-Japanese War, and that overnight, this proud, distinguished gentleman became an enemy alien, this prisoner of war. So you can see at the top below the basic personnel record, alien, enemy, or prisoner of war. So my grandfather was taken the night of Pearl Harbor. So I am, as Castles mentioned, I am a Sansei, third generation. I was not in camp, but I inherited it. So, you know, I counted up that I had 5 grandparents, 1 father, 2 mothers, 25 aunts and uncles, and a cousin who had been in camp. So that's my grandfather there in a hat and suit, and his 2 sons who were in the US Army. The one in the middle, my Uncle Babe, was killed actually the day after he helped save the Lost Battalion in Italy. And it's something that when I found that out, I was just kind of devastated, because you always hear about the heroics and you think of them, I don't know, you don't think about the day after. And to know that he was killed, sent right back out to the field and battlefield and killed the day after this historic so-called victory by the US Army was just a bit devastating. So I'm just going to do a little World War II brief history, because so much of my work is rooted in it. So during World War II, as you all know, the US was at war with Italy and Germany as well as Japan, but only those of Japanese ancestry. So both immigrant residents who were at that time not allowed to become naturalized citizens, unlike European immigrants, as well as their US-born children, were uprooted from their homes and confined in barbed wire compounds surrounded by armed guards for the duration of the war. So, once again, I want to draw your attention to some of the language that was used. So the government used a lot of euphemisms to mitigate the injustice. So you can see here that they refer to all persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, will be evacuated. But what is a non-alien? The government obviously didn't want to say all persons of Japanese ancestry, both those who were denied naturalization and US citizens, will be evacuated. So they use the word alien and non-alien. And this with a lot of other euphemisms like evacuation, relocation, that really serve over the years to really mitigate the injustice. So this shows how widespread and layered the incarceration was. The exclusion area is the whole West Coast, from which 110,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly excluded. And you can see down at the bottom there, WCCA Assembly Center. WCCA stands for the Wartime Civil Control Administration, and they implemented the mass removal of the 110,000, and they also built and administrated the 17 temporary detention camps. WRA stands for War Relocation Authority, and they built and administered the 10 permanent concentration camps and 2 isolation centers in Arizona and Utah. And then you see on the side there, the map of Alaska and Hawaii. So this is to indicate that Japanese living in Alaska and Hawaii, and what's not shown on here is that Japanese living in South America were also uprooted and sent to the mainland camps. So by the end of the war, there was roughly 125,000 American, 2/3 of whom were US citizens, as well as their parents. So, just to realize that there was no due process of law. It was a failure of the Constitution to protect their citizenry, which means all of us. The official reason that was given at the time was a military necessity, that we were a threat to national security. But in the 1980s, there was a commission on wartime relocation and internment of civilians that concluded that, in fact, the incarceration was due to racism, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership, which is basically what we have now. In 1994, I curated an exhibition called America's Concentration Camps. Remembering the Japanese American Experience at the Japanese American National Museum in Los Angeles. And it consisted of an outdoor exhibit that was the billboard that you see and the full-sized barracks. Half of it was an actual barracks that was brought down plank by plank from Heart Mountain, Wyoming. And the second half you can see was reconstructed, as well as the guard tower. So that was in the parking lot where the current pavilion, the current museum stands right now. So, as the curator, my mandate was really to produce an introductory exhibition on the camps to a broad audience. But, as a sansei, my responsibility was to also make it meaningful to my parents, aunts, uncles, and other camp survivors whose lives had such impact on my own and who were the people who actually lived through this experience. So here you can see again the massive the expanse of the incarceration, people from Alaska, Hawaii, and South America. And it's interesting, when we were taking people through this, even though, and it was, we deliberately made this map large. The designers were Ralph Applebaum Associates, who are now best known for designing the National African American Museum of History and Culture. But we together had decided to make this map of the US very large and prominent. And, as you know, or those of you who grew up in this country, the map of the United States is very iconic. It's very recognizable as the United States. And yet, we still had people go through the exhibit and say, where did this take place? Because they could not conceive of there being this kind of mass incarceration in the United States. This was part of the interior. We actually had scale models of each of the 10 camps, and plus Crystal City, which was officially an internment camp, which however incarcerated families. And these were very low-tech, do-it-yourself interactive, where people were invited to place the barracks on their own barracks onto the map where they lived. And it turns out to be, just very low-tech, but extremely emotional. Many of the people came back. They brought their children, grandchildren. Some even symbolically held their grandchildren up to place the barracks on the map. This is a book that I'd written on the making of the exhibition. I think there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes. And I really wanted to document and chronicle all that went on. So a lot of this is how we came to the decision of doing what we did. And it includes one of my favorite chapters is called Stories That Walked in the Door. And there were stories that people brought in that we had no idea of. So we really learned a lot in this process. In 2018, as Castles mentioned, I had the opportunity to be part of For Freedoms. And they did a billboard series called the 50 State Initiative, where they put up billboards in every state of the country. So, once again, Castles mentioned it, but, For Freedoms is a national platform to use the arts as a jumping off point for civic engagement, discourse, and direct action. So I used, for my billboard, I used an historical still of inmates lining up for a meal at one of the mess halls with the hashtag "YouAreHere," asserting that the past is in the present and to remind us of the US's continuing legacy of mass incarceration. And also very basically that I am you, they are us, and you too can be, are, and will be here. So this is a photo from the Japanese American National Museum from the Yukio Nakamura collection. So this was, as I mentioned, part of For Freedom's 50 State Initiative. And this was, my billboard was in Des Moines, Iowa. And interestingly, as you can see, it was right at the turnoff for the National Guard airfield. Another thing that I did for Freedoms is participate in this project. For Freedoms takes its name from President Franklin Roosevelt's 4 basic freedoms of speech, religion, and from want and fear. So another project of theirs I participated in was really decolonizing Norman Rockwell's iconic series that he did for the Saturday Evening Post in 1943. And, as I was putting this together, I'm thinking, man, you all are just too young to even know Norman Rockwell or even the Saturday Evening Post. So I wanted to bring up the original photo and poster that he did for the Freedom from Want. So as you can see, what For Freedoms did was to decolonize this and insert the all white people at the table with all various kinds of people. So that this was something that they did, they put into posters as well as billboards. And you can see with Dolores Huerta, the freedom of speech, that they utilized so many different people from all walks of life, from, very famous people to very unfamous people like myself. Then this is, of course, the In Plain Sight series. I was so fortunate, and I'm so thankful to you, Castles, for inviting me to be one of the 80 artists. And I'm not going to go into what In Plain Sight was because this is what your whole class is all around. But I was also represented Tsuru for Solidarity, which Kessels mentioned, which is a nonviolent direct action project that stands on the moral authority of Japanese Americans who were in the camps to stand in solidarity with communities being targeted today, BIPOC and all people of conscience, really, to demand an end to today's concentration camps. So in collaboration with Castles, we chose the site of the former temporary detention site of Santa Anita and the skywriting of No More Camps. So Castles, this is actually, I don't know if you've even seen this. This is a photo by the photographer Zen Sekizawa, who came out to the site and took this amazing photograph of the actual skywriting. And then this is the, this features the AR that artist Nancy Baker Cahill devised. This was featured in Hypebeast, but it was amazing how much attention and media interest that Castles and Rafa and IPS was able to gather, which really was part of the reason that they were doing this. This is Santa Anita when it was a so-called assembly center. It was a holding center for Japanese Americans that were to be held before the government built the 10 permanent camps across the country. So, this was.
Really?
Can you hear me? Okay, I thought I heard someone asking a question. So it was transformed from a racetrack into this assembly center in only 7 days. And the horse stalls were really hastily converted to living quarters with the smell and presence of horse shit and hay still there. And people talked about, being infested with fleas, being allergic to the unsanitary conditions. And then you can see in the background and from the aerial that there were over 500 barracks that held 18,000 people. This was the largest one in the country. So you can see how vast it was. These are two images. This is the one on the left is actually my two aunts and uncle in one of the horse stalls. And one of those aunts was in the previous picture that you saw after she was in Jerome, Arkansas. So you can see that they cleaned it. They installed flooring and wall covers. And, so ironically, my Uncle Pat adorned it with the UCLA pennant. He was a proud Bruin. And it's so interesting that he prioritized in bringing it there. So his name was, he signed his name as K. Patrick Okura. His first name was Kiyoshi, although only his siblings, I think, called him Kiyoshi. I always called him my Uncle Pat, but he always went by K. Patrick Okura. And he worked for the city of Los Angeles. And columnist Drew Pearson accused him of trying to pass himself off as an Irishman by signing his name, and claimed that he wrote his name with O, the apostrophe, Kura. And then the next one is the watchtowers and on the grandstand in Santa Anita. And this too, it was interesting for me because this is always used as very iconic photo of the guard towers that were in the camps. But I didn't really realize until I embarked on this project that it was actually taken at Santa Anita. So there were armed sentries as there were in all of the other camps. Also, I think I showed this to Castles and other people. This is a war relocation authority taken by Clem Albers. And that is my aunt, my Auntie Lily, who, as you could see, was quite the beauty. She was in the Rose Parade in the 30s. She was an understudy for Anna May Wong in the movies. And she's posing with Seabiscuit, which is one of the famous horses, race horses. But, I'm just so struck by this, what possessed who to compose this photograph. I think, one of my friends and colleagues, Brandon Shimoda, is going to be writing about this image. So in June 2019, the Trump administration planned to move 1,400 migrant children to Fort Sill, which is an Army base in Oklahoma. So this in itself was an alarming continuance of the government's inhumane, not to mention undemocratic policies and practices. But for Japanese Americans, it just struck too close to home, because Fort Sill was one of the detention centers for Japanese nationals that were designated as enemy aliens during World War II. As a matter of fact, my grandfather was imprisoned in Fort Sill. So within weeks of the announcement, I joined some 20 other descendants and survivors of the America's concentration camps to a protest at Fort Sill that was organized for Tsuru for Solidarity. So tsuru, it is a Japanese word for crane, which is a symbol for peace and healing. And you can see here that there are 5 survivors of the camps that are in front, holding signs connecting the past with the present. We knew we were not allowed to protest on Army property, but we decided to do it anyway. And we were really prepared by the local ACLU on the possibilities of arrest, Everyone agreed, for those who went to this particular demonstration, that they would be willing to be arrested. And we were soon met by MPs and told to move. And it was quite astounding. You can see me over on the left of the first picture, and on the left in the second picture, holding up the tsuru in front of the gate with the survivors in front. So, once he came barging on the scene, and he really just yelled, "You need to move right now." And he was just met with silence. And I put up here that to see the video coverage that Democracy Now! Did, which really shows this MP in action. And it's available on YouTube at Democracy Now!, but also at sudoforsolidarity.org. He got so frustrated, he actually yelled out, "What don't you understand? It's English. Get out." And the Army News actually reported that this MP was actually disciplined. As an Army officer at that level, you're just not supposed to lose your cool that way. These are some of the survivors again, and most of them were in their 80s. Chizu Omori, who was the woman, the second in back, was just turned 90, actually, and she was 89 when she came to Fort Sill. On the left is Kiyoshi Ina, who holds a picture of himself in camp. It really shows, when those of us who are in big cities, protests and actions, are quite prevalent, and we kind of grow sort of immune maybe to some of them. But in Lawton, Oklahoma, when we came out just on a couple of weeks' notice, it brought out all of the activists from the area. And you can see here that this shows the range of people and the diversity, with representatives from Sudo for Solidarity, ACLU, Black Lives Matter, and the American Indian Movement. And also, we gathered Sudo cranes from so many places. And one of the places that gathered to make Sudo to send was from San Quentin. So this even met the, this is from Darren Bell, and this is a syndicated, he writes and illustrates comics featuring Black and Brown people. And this came out in many papers soon thereafter. And I think you can read it. I read the president's going to start keeping migrant kids at Fort Sill, one of the concentration camps where we kept Japanese Americans during World War II. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it, said Santayana. It's one of the most repeated quotes ever, which means all of mankind probably needs to see, what do you call a memory doctor? I forget. But it shows how this protest went into the social media of the country. Tsuno had originally planned to have a massive demonstration in Washington, D.C. this past June that had to be canceled because of COVID. And one of the actions was to bring 125,000 tsuru made by people around the world to hang on the White House fence. So because we could not go, instead we held a 2-day virtual protest. 1,000 people registered. They logged in 15,000 viewers with 7 direct actions across the country, and 22 circles, healing circles for change. So I wanted to put up this description actually of what a healing circle is. Healing Circles for Change is an opportunity for people who have experienced in all its complexities the collective historic trauma of racism and oppression. It is a sacred space and time where participants sit together in a circle, face to face with one another, holding the positive intention to bring presence and empathy, creating a safe place for each person to share some part of their history. So, I was one of the facilitators for these healing circles, and the healing circles were really open to everyone, but we were asked that and required actually for the facilities, for the facilitators to be BIPOC and to create a safe space for people who are not normally heard in these situations. And we all went through about 2 hours of training. And it's one of the interesting things about Tsuru, because it's about social change, but it's also about internal healing. So it's so interesting that we have had people come to these healing circles from really all walks of life. And we've heard stories from Jews whose parents have survived the Holocaust, African Americans, with their legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, the Great Migration.
Hi, everyone. It just looks like maybe Karen's internet froze for a second. So we'll just wait for her to log back on. So if you could just hang tight with us, we'll resume in a moment.
Just an update that we did lose Karen for a moment, and she's going to hopefully be logging back in. So if you're just looking at a blank screen, just sit tight. So guys, we're trying to get in touch with Karen, and I don't know if she's having some overall internet issues, but let's just sit tight for 5 more minutes in case we can get her back. So just keep doing what you're doing and sit tight. Thank you.
Hi, can you see me?
We can see you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm doing this from my phone because evidently the internet or my computer just totally zonked out. So I'm not sure exactly where you were able to see me last or hear me last. Gosh, I am so sorry about this.
That's okay. That happens to the best of us. So you're on your phone, which means you probably can't share your PowerPoint.
Right.
Right. Well, how do you feel about
Um,
continuing a conversation without the image?
That would be fine. Were you able to, I'm not sure when it went out.
I would have to see the slide. I'm not sure. Jess, do you know which slide it was on?
Just give me a second and I'll be able to figure it out.
Let me see.
We were discussing the healing circles, I believe, was the last where we lost you. There was a slide with the healing circles.
Yes, Castles is correct. We were you were discussing the healing circles and the different kinds of
Okay.
people that had come.
Okay. So you saw most of it then. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think at this point, we will just try to open it up for questions, comments, because I do think that you saw saw everything.
Okay.
Oh, I see. So here was the healing circles. Okay, let me see. No, 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 I can't do that. Can I reverse the camera on? Oh, I can. Okay, this is awkward. Okay, let's just do it this way. Can you see that?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so is this where we were?
I think so.
Yes.
Okay, so I was just talking about the healing circles. And then let me just quickly go through to the end here if I possibly can. These are a feel for the different actions that have gone across the country, and the collaborations. La Resistencia at the Tacoma Northwest Detention Center. They're at the site of Tanfran in San Bruno, California, at the, you can see this, the South Texas Family Residential Center in Dilley, the Cook County Jail in Chicago, and that coincided with our season of Obon, which is remembering the ancestors. It's actually a celebration that takes place every summer, and then at Berks in Pennsylvania. I was mentioning that the whole concept of tsuru, you know, I have to admit that when I first heard of the making of tsuru, you know, I really actually thought it was fairly frivolous and performative. In community cultural work that I was doing, I had really advocating going beyond origami and piñatas. But it turns out to be a way for just regular people to become involved, to learn and to create. So anybody can participate. Kids are learning to make tsuru. And these are 7-foot tsuru that acted as canvases for artists for some of the actions. And this is examples of an artist with some of her creations. You know, this is, I'm just going to read it because I don't think you can read that. That in the Bay Area Tsuru Hub sent 1,500 tsuru to the Milwaukee JCL, Japanese American Citizens League, for personal transfer by Gail and Jerry Nambu, who are pictured here, to personally take to Jacob Blake, you know, who was shot and paralyzed by the Kenosha police on August 19th, 2020. And I'm just ending with this encouragement for you to actually take a look at the tsuru site with that we're doing so much of. You know, one thing that I am so believe so much in is our future generations. You know, we are not going to resolve this truth and reconciliation in my lifetime, or, you know, even perhaps in my kids' lifetimes, but it's really my grandkids and when they come, great grandchildren. So we need to start teaching children very early anti-racist views and behavior. So one of the things that tsuru has is a family
Family and Children's Committee, I think they're called, and they've been producing a lot of things for children's and family to do together. So these that look like coloring books, are actually meant to be window placards for kids. They have a bingo game on how to make tsuru. There's both this as well as videos on how to make them. The narratives, Black and Asian lives and narratives matter too. Watch and learn from these artists here. This is all on the website, and also announcing community conversations. So they're having community conversations on various topics. One is on identity and intergenerational trauma, another on anti-Black racism in our community, and then also what it really means to be in solidarity with other communities. So I think that ends my my presentation. So I'd like to turn it over to some questions or comments now.
Sure, yes, the students are entering their questions into the chat here, and I'll do my best to keep up with them and ask them to you.
Okay, let me just get into a little better light here.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, we have a couple questions about mental health. I'm very interested in your work with mental health. How much more can be done to assist people struggling with inherited trauma? What do you believe to be the most important role a mental health activist advocate has in these times?
Yeah, mental health, I think, is finally breaking the barrier of silence, and people talk more about their own mental health and the mental health of their communities. As I mentioned, one of the things that Tsuru for Solidarity is doing are these healing circles, and it's quite astounding. And they're not meant to be therapy, but really a safe space where people can talk very freely and openly about their own experiences and actually hear about the experiences of others. So that's, one thing that we have found. We had, I think, something like 500 different people want to be part of these healing circles when we did our virtual protest, and we are continuing them. So you can find out more about them on the website. I think too, there's a group here in Los Angeles that's dealing with mental health issues among young Asian Americans. And I think that the youth now are really speaking up, trying to take care of their own. There had been, a rash of suicides actually amongst Asian American women, especially students. And I think the stigma is still there, I think, of course, in many ways and in lots of communities, but it's something that is being broken now, the stigma and the silence. And I think that really is the role of advocates and activists to acknowledge both sides of the political and the personal, and how racism and injustice has such a toll on people as well as generations.
Okay, yes, we had some questions about the impact of intergenerational trauma and how can we show people that it's real?
Yeah, once again, I think the whole concept of intergenerational trauma is just being realized. And let me just share just a personal example. I was not in camp, but my husband was. He was a child in camp. And his experience in camp really informed who he was as a person, but also who he became and why. So he was a photographer who turned to film. And from the 1970s on has really sort of committed his own life to both working out his own experience in camp and the hidden aspects of it, as well as to talk about it to others. So he has done many films on camp, and now our son is also a filmmaker through, I wished he was a doctor or lawyer or someone who could actually take care of us in our old age, but no, he's a starving artist. So he is actually doing a film now on Bob, my husband, and actually considering his own intergenerational trauma on how it has affected, the camp experience has affected him through many ways. One is through child rearing, through what he's learned, but also experienced. So both of them are actually being quite open and honest about how the injustice and how the trauma has affected them. And a lot of it is not just camp, but racism in general, and specifically, I think racism on males, how it affects the masculinity of wanting, needing, trying to maintain a face that that society has put on them. But we hope that it will not only be a film that touches on this, but could be very useful as well to sort of outpicture a lot of the emotions and thoughts and anxieties that are hidden. So it is something that can take many forms. And I think that one thing I would just stress is that no matter whether you're an artist or not, everyone has agency. Everyone has an ability to make a difference. And it's how we decide and choose to do that. So whatever your art form is, whether it's in a traditional medium or not, you need to look into yourself to really bring out what agency that we do have. And that's part, I think, of the colonization that we are suffering from, is that so many BIPOC, LGBTQ people, etc., are so marginalized. We have been stripped from the power that we have, and that we have to learn and relearn to exhibit and to play out.
Great. We have a few questions regarding teaching anti-racism to young children. You talk about healing circles and teaching children about anti-racism. Do you think combining these things would be beneficial? Have you ever worked with kids in a political way as an aspiring teacher, I'm very curious of the correct ways to go about teaching about the difficult topics of racism.
Yeah. Ibram Kendi, his recent book on anti-racism, he got together with Jason Reynolds. Jason Reynolds is a YA young adult author, is actually the national ambassador for young adult literature. And they got together to write a book on how to be an anti-racist. And so they take a lot of Ibram Kendi's very scholarly work, and Jason Reynolds just breaks it down and really talks about it in ways that I can understand and that kids can understand. Ibram Kendi also wrote himself a book on, I think it's called Anti-Racist Baby. It's a picture book on how to be an anti-racist. So yeah, I think it's very challenging. I think it's something that, depending on your environment as well, I think we just need to, just like mental health, we need to break the silence around talking about racism. In Black families, they have the talk, and it's really about the perils of being Black in America. And I think more and more people are realizing that. I think what was happening to Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and also so many trans women, especially of color. It's something that has been happening for a long time. It's not anything new, but I think that now with this double pandemic that we're having, and with the world seeing a cop put his knee on another human being for 9 minutes, and it is something that most people have never seen. I think Black people in America have experienced this, have seen it, but I think others of us have not. So, now that we have to know what to do with this information.
We have some questions regarding your relatives or anyone that you know that experienced the internment camps. How did their view of America change before and after that experience?
Yeah, it depends, like everything. It depends on the person. I think one thing that we are realizing is that we have been told what to feel, how to feel for so long. It's sometimes hard to distinguish how we really feel. Specifically for Japanese Americans like my parents, there was a extreme pressure to be 200% American after the war. And that's how I was brought up, actually. I was brought up with be careful what you do, what you say, you have to get all A's, you have to be the model minority. And I think a lot of us bought it. A lot of our parents bought it. So from a cultural point of view, there is a saying that gets misinterpreted all the time. Two Japanese words. One is shikata ganai, which has been erroneously translated as simply get over it. just can't be helped. But in fact is an acknowledgement that life is hard. And so you need to get on with it. You don't need to get over it. You need to do something with it. It's a way of continuing, not a defeatist attitude. The other is a word called gaman, which means to endure the endurable. And this too comes from, Japanese culture, the stiff upper lip, the needing to put on a good face, the need to rise above. And my pet peeve, are really Japanese Americans who continue to tout this as important. It was definitely something that we needed to do. Our grandparents, my parents needed to do that. They needed to endure, to survive. Survival is the best resistance. But at this point, we cannot just swallow it and be above things. We need to call it where it is. We can no longer take the burden of that we survive because we're so hardy and we're so forgiving. We need to understand the resilience that our parents and grandparents had, but we also need not to let the government off the hook, which is the entity that put us here in the first place. It's like blaming the victim, and that happens so often. So I think, that's one thing that we just have to really be very vigilant about.
Karen, you have been so generous. I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to anything that may be coming up for you that you want to add as a final note.
Gosh. Well, first of all, I'm really sorry about the internet disconnect and the technical difficulties. We always have that problem in media, and those of you in media know this. You show up somewhere and you can't show something because the screen, the room doesn't get dark, or you don't have a extension cord long enough. Those were the old school technical difficulties. And now, they're just beyond, sometimes you just can't help it, like my internet going in and out. So yeah, I really apologize for that. I really thank Castles again and Jess for inviting me. I think this in plain sight project is not only inherently wonderful and has so many ramifications, but it also acts as a model for others. Not the same, perhaps, but it's like, if they can do this, maybe I can do that. So, once again, I think it's the inspiration that has the long-term quality that I really appreciate. So thank you all. I wish I could meet you all and see what you're all doing. Holly, Jess, Castles, let's try to keep in touch. Castles especially, let's catch up.
And I just want to interject. I think this is the book you're talking about.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And there is, for the educators, there is a teacher's guide to that the school library journal, I think, put out. So both Kendi and Reynolds have been extremely generous, and I think that those kinds of things are key to the future.
Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing your knowledge and the history and stories, personal stories. I think that's so powerful, and it's such an important way for us to learn about history is through this kind of oral history. And just thank you for being so gracious and inspiring and wonderful. We are honored to share space with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. We'll come back for next week. We have an incredible artist, a designer, poster designer, member of the Center for Cultural Power, which is a really important center here in Los Angeles that features and supports the work of undocumented POC artists, Julio Salgado. And as well, his posters have inspired, I'd say, even though he himself is quite young, he has inspired an entire generation of young undocumented illustrators who are illustrating and making gorgeous graphics of inspiration and resilience right now. So he's also very funny. And so I'm sure you will enjoy his lecture very much and also find it inspiring in these challenging times. So thank you all for coming and look forward to next week.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.